I stood in that school parking lot, watching a man twice my size get in my face,
I know you're
spit
just doing
flying
your
as he
job,
screamed for
but you
me to
gotta
fight him
understand this
right
is
there.
important to me.
His fists were clenched, veins popping in his neck. Behind me, my 12-year-old son sat in our car, watching his father do absolutely nothing. The thing is, this guy had no idea what I was, what I'd been, and honestly, that's exactly how I wanted to keep it. Hit like, subscribe for more betrayal stories, and comment your city or country. My name is Tristan, and 3 weeks ago, my son Kyle came home with a black eye. Not the first time. Won't pretend it was. But this one was different. This one came with silence. Kyle didn't say a word when he walked through the door. Just went straight to his room, closed the door, and I heard the lock click. I gave him space. Made dinner. Knocked softly around 7. Not hungry, Dad. Kyle, we need to talk about this. There's nothing to talk about. But there was. There always is when a kid stops talking. See, Kyle's a good kid. Quiet like me. Reads a lot. Not into sports much. More into computers and building those little robot kits. He's skinny for his age, wears glasses, keeps to himself. And apparently, that makes him a target. The bully's name was Evan. Thick kid, mean streak a mile wide. And a father who clearly taught him that might makes right. I found out the details from another parent. Evan had been tormenting Kyle for months. Tripping him in the hallway. Stealing his lunch. Calling him names I won't repeat. And 3 days before that black eye, Evan shoved Kyle down a flight of stairs at school. 10 steps. Concrete landing. Kyle got lucky. Sprained wrist, bruised ribs, and that shiner. Could have been so much worse. The school finally called a meeting. Said they were taking it seriously. Yeah, right. I took the afternoon off work. I do data analysis for a logistics company, boring desk job, pays the bills, and drove to Madison Middle School. Kyle didn't want to come, but I told him he had to. This was about him. We sat in Principal Morgan's office. She was late 40s, sharp suit, fake smile that didn't reach her eyes. The kind of administrator who cared more about optics than kids. Mr. Hayes, thank you for coming in, she said, gesturing to the chairs. I sat. Kyle slumped beside me, hood up, arms crossed. So, we've reviewed the incident. Morgan continued. Flipping through papers like this was some kind of business transaction. And while we understand Kyle was injured, the cameras show it might have been accidental. Accidental. I kept my voice level. Always keep it level. A kid shoves my son down the stairs, and that's an accident. Well, boys roughhouse. Sometimes things get out of hand. This wasn't roughhousing. This was assault. She sighed, like I was being difficult. We've spoken to Evan and his father. They're willing to apologize and move forward. I think that's the mature approach here. Where is this father? I asked. Morgan checked her watch. He should be here any. The door banged open. That's when Dominic walked in. Big guy. 6'3", maybe 230, most of it muscle gone soft around the edges. Wore an expensive leather jacket, designer jeans, boots that cost more than my monthly car payment. Everything about him screamed money and arrogance. He didn't apologize for being late. Didn't even look at Kyle. This the kid? Dominic asked, jerking his chin toward my son. Mr. Chun, please, let's keep this civil, Morgan said, but her tone was gentle. Deferential, like she was handling a valued customer. My son says your kid started it, Dominic said, dropping into a chair without being invited. Says he was talking trash, and Evan defended himself. I looked at Kyle. His face had gone pale. That's not true, I said quietly. You calling my kid a liar? I'm saying my son was hospitalized. Your son wasn't. Those are facts. Dominic leaned forward, elbows on knees. Maybe your kid needs to toughen up. World's not a safe space, buddy. Boys need to learn to handle themselves. Something cold settled in my chest. The thing I'd spent 3 years trying to bury. They're 12, I said. Old enough to know actions have consequences. He stood up, and suddenly the office felt smaller. Look, I'll talk to Evan, tell him to ease up. But your kid needs to stop being so soft. That's on you, Dad. Morgan jumped in. I think what Mr. Chun is trying to say is that both boys could benefit from conflict resolution, I'm saying exactly what I mean. Dominic cut her off. He looked down at me, still sitting. You gonna teach your son to be a man, or you gonna keep raising a victim? Kyle's hand tightened on the armrest. I put my hand over his. We're done here, I said, standing slowly. Principal Morgan, if this school can't protect my son, I'll be contacting the district office and possibly a lawyer. Dominic laughed. Actually laughed. A lawyer. Tough guy. I walked toward the door, Kyle right behind me. Yeah, that's what I thought. Dominic called after us. Run away. That's what you teach him, right? Be a coward. I stopped. Every instinct in my body, the old instincts, the trained ones, told me to turn around, to show this man exactly how wrong he was. But I'd made a promise, so I kept walking. We made it to the parking lot. I unlocked the car, Kyle got in the passenger seat, and I stood there for a second, keys in hand, trying to breathe. That's when I heard boots on asphalt behind me. Hey, I turned. Dominic had followed us out. We're not done talking, he said, walking right up to me, invading my space like he owned it. Yeah, we are. No. See, you disrespected me in there. Threatened me with lawyers. Made me look bad in front of the principal. You made yourself look bad. His jaw clenched. You got a real mouth on you for a guy who looks like he's never thrown a punch in his life. I said nothing. That's what I thought. He stepped closer, close enough that I could smell the coffee on his breath. How about this? Right here, right now. You and me. We settle this like men. Winner's kid gets to stay at the school. Loser's kid transfers. Deal. I stared at him. Really looked at him. Saw the anger, the entitlement, the absolute certainty that he could intimidate me into anything. No, I said simply. You serious? He spread his arms wide, like he couldn't believe it. I'm giving you a chance to handle this. To show your son you're not a complete. Move, I said. Still quiet. Still calm. But something in my voice made him hesitate. Just for a second. Then he smiled. Wow, you really are pathetic. He turned and walked back toward the school, laughing. Loud enough for everyone in the parking lot to hear. I got in the car. Started the engine. Put it in drive. Kyle stared straight ahead. Silent. Dad, he finally said, voice barely a whisper. Why didn't you do anything? I looked at him. At my son. At the disappointment in his eyes. Because that's not who I am anymore, I said. But even as I said it, I wondered if I was lying. To him. Or to myself. I sat alone in the living room long after Kyle had gone to bed. The house was too quiet, the kind of silence that presses on your chest and makes breathing feel heavy. I knew I couldn't keep this secret much longer. Not from him, not from myself. It had been almost 3 years since Amelia passed. Cancer took her faster than any of us expected. She was the light of our lives, and without her, the shadows crept in slowly but surely. After her funeral, I made a promise I planned to keep. No more fighting, no more war. I would raise Kyle in peace, give him the childhood Amelia and I always dreamed of. But life doesn't work that way. Not when shadows belong to your past, and the world outside your door is full of threats. I reached into the top drawer beside my chair and pulled out a small, worn leather case. It was my old military ID, some medals from long-forgotten missions, a folded letter Amelia had written me during my last deployment. I had tucked it away, hidden it from Kyle, hidden it even from myself. Because if he knew who I was, the kind of man I'd been, things would never be normal for him. Life was simpler if he saw only the quiet man behind a computer screen, the data analyst, the dad who fixed dinner and helped with homework. But Kyle didn't see me that way anymore. Not after school yesterday. Kyle never likes to talk about what happens at school. He swallows the pain and hides behind his quiet demeanor. But those bruises on his body and in his heart don't forget. The truth was, Evan's bullying wasn't just bruising skin. It was bruising Kyle's spirit. I still remember the night we returned from school, the first time I realized how much this was breaking him. He sat on his bed, tracing circles on the comforter, eyes distant. Dad, I'm tired. His voice cracked in a way that drowned me in helplessness. That was the moment I decided I had to tell him everything. The truth might sting, but lies would only make the walls around him higher. The morning was thick with the smell of fresh coffee and worn leather. I found Kyle in the kitchen, sipping cereal, eyes fixed on his reflection in the window. "Kyle, I want to tell you about who I really am," I started, voice shaky but steady. He looked up with something between curiosity and fear. I wasn't always the guy who came home late from a boring office job. I lived a different life, one where every day was a fight for survival. A life where I was trained to be faster, stronger, and colder than anyone else. His eyes grew wide, but he didn't interrupt. That was something. His silence meant he wanted to hear more. "I was part of Delta Force," I said quietly, as if the name alone held too much power. "Fought in places you've never heard of. Did missions nobody talks about, because the price of failure was death. But I left all that behind because your mom wanted a different life for us." Kyle blinked, processing. "You never told me." "No. I wanted you to have a childhood free of that. Free of fear. I promised your mom I'd protect you from that world." He hesitated, then asked, "But why didn't you protect me yesterday?" That question, the one I dreaded, hung heavy between us. Kyle was right. I'd failed him. Not because I was weak, but because I was trying not to become the man from the past any longer. I sighed, took a deep breath. Sometimes the strongest thing is knowing when to walk away. Because fighting doesn't always fix things, it can make them worse. I'm trying to find a way that keeps you safe without losing who I am. Kyle looked down at his hands, then back up at me with guarded eyes. "But Dad, what if walking away means they win?" "That's the risk," I admitted. "But I'm not just going to watch anymore. I swear, I'm figuring it out." Days after that conversation, I started paying closer attention. The phone calls at odd hours. The rumors spreading at school. Kyle's once bright smile slowly fading. One evening, I found myself scrolling through old mission reports I'd saved on my desktop. The precision, the planning, the cold calculating of chances. I realized some part of me had never stopped fighting. It just went quiet. Kyle had to see that fight again. The fight to protect what mattered without shattering everything. The next morning, I called Victor, an old teammate from Delta Force who had turned private investigator. We hadn't talked in years, but he was direct and discreet, the kind of guy who knew how to dig without making noise. "Victor, I need to know everything about Dominic and his son, Evan," I said. "The bully and his father. They're more dangerous than you think." Victor didn't hesitate. "I'll start digging. But you sure you want to open that door again? It's not the kind of fight you walk away from." "I don't want to fight. I want to protect my son." As days passed, the pieces started coming together. Dominic wasn't just an arrogant drunk shouting at parking lots. He owned a local construction company with big ties in the town. His power spread wide, far beyond the school halls. Victor sent reports, evidence of Dominic's past, bullying patterns, payoffs to families, shady business deals. Every brick I found bolstered the fortress I planned to build around my family. But the more I peeled back, the more I saw how far Dominic's influence ran. The school principal, Morgan, kept brushing things under the rug, turning blind eyes away. That school meeting was only a front. Morgan's duty was to protect every child, but she played a different game, a game where Dominic's money and power ruled. Kyle's torment wasn't just a schoolyard spat. It was a symptom of a system rigged against us. I looked at Kyle one night, sprawled asleep in his bed, bruises fading but scars lingering deeper. I clenched my fists, not with anger but determination. I had told him about my past. Now it was time he saw the man I still was beneath the surface, the man who wouldn't let evil win. The war wasn't over. Not yet. But the fight had begun. A week after my conversation with Victor, the tension in town shifted. It wasn't just my family feeling the effects. The ripple spread quietly but aggressively, like a storm gathering strength on the horizon. The worst came one gray afternoon, when Kyle came home with more than bruises on his skin. He carried the kind of silence that only deep, unspoken pain can bring. When he stepped through the door, I saw it. Fresh cuts on his forearms, hidden beneath long sleeves. Without asking a word, I pulled him close. His frame trembled against mine, not from cold, but from fear. "Why didn't you tell me?" I whispered. He looked up, eyes glossy. I didn't want to make things worse. But they were already worse. I'd seen firsthand that Dominic's influence penetrated every corner. Teachers, the PTA, even local law enforcement. When Kyle was hospitalized for a concussion after another vicious attack in school hallways, the school shifted blame onto my son. They said Kyle was provoking Evan. It was unbelievable. Hearing it made my blood boil, but I was forced to keep my calm. Because this wasn't a fight at the schoolyard anymore. It was a battle in the shadows where the stakes were much higher. Principal Morgan met me in her office, her arms folded, eyes icy. "Mr. Hayes, we expect you to manage this family situation. The boys need space. Fighting only makes things worse at school." I fixed her with a look that said I wasn't walking away this time. "This isn't just boys being boys, Morgan. My son's safety is your responsibility." Her lips pressed thin, but she said, "We must be cautious. The Chun family contributes significantly to this school's funding." Her words landed like a slap. Money mattered more than a child's broken body. Kyle's world felt smaller. The hallway where he once walked confidently between classes felt like an obstacle course rigged against him. Our neighbors barely noticed the bruises, or worse, whispered, blaming Kyle for bringing trouble. Some parents even told me to ignore it. "Kids will be kids," they said. The weight of isolation crushed us both. One evening, I found Kyle staring blankly at his homework, his hands shaking. "Dad, I don't want to go back. Not there." That ache in his voice split me open. "We're going to fix this," I promised. My nights grew longer and darker. I pored over every detail, school records, emails, witness accounts. I couldn't rely on the school. They'd turned a blind eye. So I did what I knew best. I dusted off the skills I had left behind. I worked quietly, carefully. Late nights on the phone with Victor, tracking Dominic's affairs, uncovering ties to city officials and local businesses. It was a twisted web where greed shielded cruelty. One night, as the town leaned into uneasy sleep, I watched Dominic at a local bar, loud and arrogant, boasting about controlling the school's principal. I caught Victor's encrypted message, found financial connections. Dominic buying silence. The pieces were falling into place. But the more I dug, the harder Dominic pressed back. He started showing up at places he shouldn't be. My workplace, the grocery store, near Kyle's school. His threats were wrapped in smiles. "You're out of your league, Hayes." Not once had I broken my promise to Amelia. We would avoid violence. But this was testing me. I saw Kyle's resilience fading, replaced by a wary caution no child should carry. Still, I didn't move hastily. A heated argument with Morgan at the school board meeting exposed cracks in her facade. She defended Dominic with cold professionalism, brushing off concerns, blaming misunderstandings and miscommunications. When I confronted Morgan later in her office, she warned, "Careful, Tristan. You're poking a hornet's nest bigger than you realize." But I was already past caring. This was no longer just about a bully or his father. It was about a system built to protect the powerful and crush the vulnerable. And we were standing squarely in its path. The days slowly blended into nights, and the fight to protect my son didn't pause for rest. Every morning, I woke up more determined, more focused. It was clear, it was more than just kids having trouble in school. It was a deep-rooted problem involving power, corruption, and silence. Victor, my old Delta Force teammate turned private investigator, was my lifeline through this chaos. When I called him, there was no hesitation. He understood immediately what was at stake. "I'll uncover every stone," he promised, "no matter how deep it's buried." His work was tireless. Victor didn't deal in guesses or rumors. He delivered facts. He started with digging into Dominic Chen's personal world, the man whose son was bullying my boy and who was now turning my world upside down. Victor's findings were alarming. Dominic Chen wasn't just any angry dad at the school meeting. He owned a local construction company, a major player in our town's economy, with links to politicians, officials, even the school board itself. His money wasn't just to buy things. It bought silence, loyalty, and immunity. Victor uncovered that Evan, Dominic's son, wasn't a first-time bully. At least 3 other children from neighboring districts had complained about similar harassment, and every time, the charges had been quietly dropped. Parents given hush money, schools pressured into silence, all orchestrated by Dominic's vast influence. I pored over those files late into the night, my fingers tracing every detail. The evidence of donated funds to Morgan, the principal who'd seemed so indifferent to Kyle's suffering. Emails hinting at threats to parents who wanted to speak publicly. And worse, irregularities in Dominic's company books, payments to fake vendors, tax evasions protected by legal loopholes. One evening, after reviewing footage Victor sent me from a bar where Dominic exchanged unmarked envelopes with local councilmen, I felt the old war-hardened instinct kick in. This was bigger than a personal feud. This was organized, intentional. Kyle watched me, sometimes from the doorway, sometimes at the dinner table, sensing the storm swirling around us. He wanted answers, but I didn't have many that wouldn't terrify him. "We're going to win this, son," I told him one quiet night. Not with fists, but with truth. The school was my next battlefield. Walking into Principal Morgan's office again, I felt the weight of every failure that had led us here. Her professional mask barely hid her disdain. "We expect you to handle your family's situation privately," she said coldly. "The boys need space. Fighting only escalates issues." Her words cut through me. She was their shield, quietly protecting Dominic's interests instead of my son's safety. I slammed my file down. "This is no longer a private matter. It's systemic abuse. You're letting a bully hide behind power and money." Morgan blinked, but her resolve didn't waver. "We follow protocols. Your son must learn to adapt." Adapt? Adapt to being hurt, to being ignored, to being erased? I refused to stand down. The school board meeting was a ceremony of tension and skepticism. I presented Victor's findings, documents, video evidence, whistleblower testimonies. Faces around the room shifted uncomfortably. Morgan tried to discredit me, calling it personal vendetta, but I countered with facts so stark they couldn't be ignored. The board agreed to open an external investigation. A small victory, but a critical one. Outside, I saw Dominic watching, his glare sharp, cold. He knew the real threat wasn't me. It was the truth. I was ready. This was no longer the timid man walking away from fights. This was a man honed by years of war, fighting smarter, fighting with evidence, fighting for his son's future. The battle lines were drawn, and this war had only begun. The leaves outside had begun to redden and drop, collecting like discarded promises along the curb as tension in our house built to an unbearable pitch. It was a season of endings, but I felt something else, an edge sharpening within, a resolve that hadn't surfaced in years. Kyle moved through the halls as if hunted, flinching at every unexpected sound. Evenings were quiet except for the soft click of him locking his bedroom door. I slept with my phone on the nightstand, a lifetime of muscle memory keeping my senses sharp. Victor became my second shadow, updating me on Dominic's moves. One Friday night, the hum of engine headlights passed our window and didn't fade. The warning came too late. A furious banging echoed up the porch steps. Dominic, large frame silhouetted against the porch light, his fist pounding on the door like the judge delivering a sentence. I didn't flinch. Kyle watched from the top of the stairs, clutching the banister so hard his knuckles blanched. My heart hammered, but I forced myself steady. "Tristan," Dominic roared, "open up and settle this like a real man." His voice was thick with liquor, rage barely leashed. I pressed the record button on my phone behind my back. "You need to leave, Dominic," I replied through the door. "You're drunk. You're trespassing." He responded with a wild swing. A sculpture knocked off the porch railing. And then, the sickening sound of glass shattering as he smashed his way through the window. Kyle gasped upstairs. I moved him farther away, shielding him behind me. The local police were on speed dial, but everything about Dominic radiated confidence. By the time blue lights showed and cops cuffed him on our lawn, he was laughing. Connections, Tristan. You don't know who you're messing with. He was out again before breakfast, but the illusion of safety in our home had shattered. Kyle sat through breakfast with a hollow face, his eggs untouched, his gaze relentless but lost. I wish Mom was here, he whispered, voice so low I barely heard. She'd know what to do. It cut deep, but it also forced me to re-examine every move. My promise to Amelia wasn't just about never using violence. It was about smart protection, about dignity and justice. Amelia was the first person to ever see the gentle in me, the part not defined by rank, training, or scars. Dominic forced my hand, but I wouldn't play his game. Direct confrontation was over. I'd use what I knew, a different set of skills, ones most people didn't even realize existed beyond movies and rumors. Operation Quiet Justice began. I contacted Dominic's business partners anonymously, planting subtle seeds of doubt. I crafted tips, untraceable and precise, and sent them to state authorities and the IRS, watching the web of fraud and intimidation begin to unravel. Victor performed digital magic. He exposed payments disguised as donations, emails that showed Morgan's blind I wasn't just administrative, it was bought. Within weeks, Dominic's closest associates began to pull away. Meetings were postponed. Loans were suddenly frozen for review. Dominic grew frantic. At the next school event, a town charity drive, Dominic cornered me outside, away from the crowd. You think you're clever? He sneered, hands twitching. You can't touch me. I make the rules here. I met his gaze and calmly shifted my stance, years of martial training evident in the ease of my posture. When his hand shot out, fast and reckless, I intercepted it, my grip subtle, force just on the edge of pain, his movement locked helpless in seconds. His bravado vanished. I leaned in, voice low but unmistakable. Last warning, Dominic. Walk away, before you lose everything. He staggered back, face pale, eyes wide not with fear of a physical beating, but with the realization this fight was no longer about fists or anger. It was a war of patience and intelligence. The crowd watched, murmurs echoing. I'd made my point. Strength wasn't always loud. Sometimes, it's knowing exactly when not to fight. Kyle heard about the incident from classmates, rumors swirling with intensity. At home, he was quiet, but for the first time, there was hope in his eyes. Dad, you didn't give in, he said one evening, sitting with me on the back porch. But you didn't hide either. I nodded, hand resting on his shoulder. Sometimes winning means not playing by their rules. You protect what matters, but you do it with your heart, your mind, and your dignity. The weeks that followed saw Dominic's business begin to crumble. Lawsuits, investigations, employee resignations. Morgan was evasive at school, her mask slipping, but the system she'd hidden behind was starting to fracture under scrutiny. Most importantly, Kyle stopped flinching at shadows. He spoke up in class, he stood a little taller, and gradually, laughter returned. Almost a sound I didn't recognize anymore. It had been so long. Our home felt different, too. The heavy air of fear was lifting. I remembered Amelia's letter from my deployment, folded and worn. In it, she wrote, "Strength is not only defending your loved ones, but knowing when to be gentle, when to let dignity heal the wounds violence would only deepen." Dominic wasn't finished, and the town wasn't ready to confront all its demons. But for the first time since the nightmare began, I believed we could win. I tucked Kyle in that night, the autumn wind rattling the windows but not frightening us anymore. And in the silence, I thanked Amelia for teaching me the power of quiet revenge. The last few weeks had been a whirlwind, but for the first time since this nightmare began, I saw cracks forming in Dominic's carefully constructed world. My quiet tactics, backed by Victor's relentless digging, were beginning to unravel the armor that money and influence had built around him. It started with subtle shifts. Business partners who once stayed loyal began avoiding his calls. Meetings scheduled by his office were canceled without explanation, and whispers of an IRS inquiry began circulating through local news channels. Dominic's confident, almost arrogant demeanor was fading, replaced by a nervous tension that made him twitch at the edges. One evening, as the town came alive with lights and chatter, I attended a fundraiser at a community center near Kyle's school. The venue was packed with parents, teachers, and local leaders, a place where Dominic thrived, confident in his status and connections. I spotted him almost immediately, leaning against the wall, watching, waiting. His eyes landed on me, sharpened by a mix of anger and disbelief. He couldn't figure out how quietly his position was crumbling. He pushed through the crowd and cornered me in a hallway. "You're playing a dangerous game, Tristan," he said, voice low and threatening. There was a strange calm in me, years of military discipline keeping my reactions measured. When his hand lashed out to grab my wrist, I caught it effortlessly. Years of training had taught me to recognize aggression, to respond with precision. With a subtle wrist lock that took mere seconds, Dominic was immobilized, his arm twisted in a way that commanded submission without injury. I leaned close, my voice steady. "Leave now. This is your last warning." His breath hitched. The bravado drained from his face, replaced by something like fear of a fight he wasn't prepared to face. Dominic staggered back and disappeared into the crowd. Word spread fast. Kyle heard students whispering about this silent showdown. It was clear I was no longer just the quiet dad hiding in the background. At home, Kyle finally looked me in the eyes and said, "Dad, you didn't back down. You stood your ground. That means everything to me." His words hit deeper than any punch ever could. But even as things shifted in our favor, the truth began to surface about how deep the corruption ran. Victor's investigation uncovered something no one expected. Principal Morgan wasn't just turning a blind eye. She was actively involved in protecting Dominic and his interests. Her silence and dismissive actions were part of a larger plan to keep the school's reputation clean and Dominic's influence intact. Morgan was not only ignoring bullying. She was manipulating reports and suppressing complaints to safeguard her own position. And that was the second layer of betrayal buried beneath the surface. The unmasking of this alliance shocked the community. For the first time, parents began to speak openly, sharing stories of their own children's struggles and cover-ups. While Dominic felt the noose tightening around his business dealings, Morgan was facing growing scrutiny from the school board and parents demanding accountability. Our fight was no longer just for Kyle. It was for every child silenced by fear and power. At night, I sat at the kitchen table with all the documents, videos, and testimonies we've gathered. This evidence was our most powerful weapon, ready to be wielded in the coming battles. Kyle, watching me work with renewed hope, stood by my side, the scared boy of weeks ago replaced by someone beginning to believe in justice. The road ahead was still long and challenging, but we had reached our turning point. For the first time, I dared to believe we were winning. The more Victor and I peeled back the layers on Dominic Chun and his son, the clearer it became. Dominic was just a piece of a much darker puzzle. There was someone deeper controlling the strings, a shadow in the school's own corridors. Victor sat across from me in my dimly lit study, his eyes heavy but focused, a thick folder on the table between us. "Tristan, whatever you think about Dominic, this is bigger. It's Principal Morgan. She's not just turning a blind eye. She's actively covering for him." The name hit me harder than I expected. Morgan, the very person appointed to protect the children, was betraying us all. I flipped open the folder and began scanning the documents and emails Victor had uncovered. There were months of altered school reports, suppressed bullying complaints, and suspicious financial transfers linking Morgan to Dominic's construction business. "This isn't just professional negligence," Victor continued. "She's been involved in this for years, using her position to shield Dominic and his son from any real consequences. The implications shook me. The betrayal wasn't limited to a bullying case. It was systemic corruption inside the walls we trusted. And Morgan's motivation wasn't only money. I learned that her brother had been dishonorably discharged from the military after a scandal involving misconduct. Rumors suggested I had reported him, a fact that could explain her personal vendetta. Everything clicked. Morgan's cold dismissals, her refusal to act, her cold stare during meetings. They weren't mistakes or incompetence. They were deliberate acts of sabotage aimed to destroy me. Not just my reputation, but my family's safety. The school was an enemy camp, and our fight was no longer just about my son, Kyle. It was about every child those walls failed, every family silenced by power. I sat back, overwhelmed, but also resolute. Victor closed the folder and looked at me. "You're ready for what's next, aren't you?" I nodded, swallowing the ache of betrayal. These people think they're untouchable. Time to prove they're not. The first step was gathering every bit of evidence to expose Morgan's involvement. We compiled altered reports, testimonies from parents afraid to speak out, and documents linking her to Dominic's schemes. This dossier wouldn't just bring down one corrupt father or a negligent school principal. It could shake the entire school district. The community needed to know. Kyle noticed the change in me. For once, he saw not just a tired, beaten father, but a man preparing for war. One night, he asked quietly, "Dad, who's the real enemy?" I looked at his young face. "Sometimes, the enemy hides where you least expect it, son. But when you find the truth, you have to stand and fight, not with fists, but with courage and justice." Days later, we presented the evidence to the school board and district officials during a specially called meeting. The room was thick with tension as parents, teachers, and community members gathered in hushed whispers, the weight of years of silence breaking in the air. Morgan sat at the far end, her carefully constructed facade beginning to crumble. Dominic was absent, his empire starting to fracture under pressure. The evidence was undeniable. The board announced an immediate investigation into Morgan and Dominic's corrupt activities, removing her from her position pending the outcome. For the first time in a long time, Kyle smiled with a spark of hope. Neighbors, once silent, began sharing their stories of intimidation and cover-ups. Parents who feared retaliation now found strength in numbers. The school was forced to face its broken system. But victory wasn't just legal, it was personal. Kyle and I shared a moment that night. Sitting on the porch, cool wind brushing past us, I told him, "This fight isn't over. But you've already taken the first step. You showed your strength by standing with me." Kyle's eyes shone with determination. "We'll fix this for every kid who'd been silenced." I wrapped my arm around him and whispered, "We're doing more than fighting bullies. We're changing the game." Though the road ahead was long, filled with court battles and public scrutiny, our resolve was unbreakable. We had uncovered the truth and refused to be crushed by it. The real enemy had surfaced, and together, we faced it with everything we had. The truth about Principal Morgan's involvement sent shockwaves through the school and the town. It wasn't just neglect or passive turning away. It was a deliberate, calculated betrayal. Morgan had been carefully weaving a web of control, using her authority to protect Dominic Chun and silence those who threatened their shared power. When Victor handed me the documents, emails with coded language, financial records linking her to Dominic's company, school complaints mysteriously disappearing, I felt my chest tighten. This wasn't just a personal grudge or professional failure. It was conspiracy inside the very system sworn to protect children. Morgan's brother had been kicked out of the military under dishonorable circumstances. Victor's research suggested that years ago, I had filed a report that contributed to that discharge. This wasn't just a cover-up, it was personal for her. The refusal to act on Kyle's bullying wasn't incompetence. It was cold, calculated revenge. I knew then the fight had grown beyond Kyle. It was for every child who'd been failed by the school, every parent silenced by threats. I shared the evidence with Adrian, a seasoned education lawyer with experience in corruption cases. "We can't just expose them," Adrian warned. "We need to dismantle the system that enabled this behavior. The lawsuit will be long and messy, but it's the only way to force real change." Together, we prepared to file a class action lawsuit against the school district, naming Morgan, Dominic, and others complicit in the scandal. Courtroom battles began with harsh cross-examinations and smear campaigns from Dominic's defense. They painted me as a hostile father, a man bent on destruction. Morgan's legal team pleaded ignorance and blamed administrative errors for missing reports. But our evidence was meticulous. Emails with timestamps, corroborating testimonies from families who'd suffered in silence, recordings showing instances of Morgan's interference. Under pressure, Morgan's defenses began to crumble. The school board suspended her and launched an internal investigation. Dominic faced criminal charges for tax evasion, bribery, and intimidation tactics. The story reached local media outlets. Parents, teachers, and students came forward with their experiences. Public outcry demanded reform. Kyle sat beside me as news reports aired footage of Morgan's removal and Dominic's legal troubles. "Dad, is this really happening?" I nodded. "Yes, son. We're breaking the cycle. But it's only the beginning." Behind the scenes, we worked with therapy counselors to engage families affected by bullying, including Evan, Dominic's son, who was now receiving help for his behavior. I testified in court, appealing for justice and healing, not just punishment. "We must restore dignity," I said during a hearing. "Revenge will only breed more pain. Real justice is rebuilding trust for every family, every child." The court agreed to enforce new anti-bullying policies in all schools under the district's jurisdiction. A committee was formed to monitor school activities, ensure transparency, and offer support services. Community meetings became regular, a platform for voices long ignored. Kyle found his confidence growing. Where once he feared hallways and whispers, he now participated in student councils and advocacy groups. One afternoon after school, he surprised me with, "Dad, I want to help other kids like me." We worked together on youth programs, teaching bullying prevention and emotional resilience. Often, I thought back to Amelia's words about strength being knowing when to fight and when to forgive. This fight had grown into a mission, not just to protect my son, but to change the world for every child trapped in silence. And slowly, against all odds, that change was happening. The day the hearing was scheduled, the courtroom was packed with families, reporters, and community members who had felt the weight of silence for too long. The air was thick with expectation as everyone waited to see justice in motion, and some, still doubting it would ever come. Dominic Chin arrived with a smug confidence, apparently unwilling to fade despite the avalanche of evidence facing him. But the look in Morgan's eyes told a different story, taut, guarded, aware that the bribes and collusions were now cracking. Adrian stood by my side, papers organized, ready for every legal battle. I looked at Kyle sitting quietly, clutching his mother's locket, silently drawing strength from the promise his mom had made me keep. Opening arguments began with clear, concise statements of the grievous harms caused, bullying that was ignored, evidence tampered with, and a school system that had prioritized power over safety. Several witnesses took the stand. Parents who had tried to speak out and were silenced, teachers who had quietly supported Kyle but feared for their jobs, and families of other children bullied by Evan and protected by Dominic's influence. Morgan's defense tried to cast doubt, painting accusations as exaggerations from disgruntled parents and an overprotective father. But videos, emails, and testimonies told a story impossible to deny. The courtroom held its breath when Victor was called to testify as an expert investigator, outlining the digital trail of fraud, intimidation, and cover-ups. "Mr. Victor, how extensive was the involvement of the principal in these actions?" the prosecutor asked. Victor's calm voice answered, The principal wielded considerable influence to obstruct investigation and manipulate school records to protect Dominic Chun and his son. This was a systemic failure fueled by personal vendettas and financial gain. Morgan's face paled. When I took the stand, I dropped the facade of the quiet analyst and spoke from the heart. A man fighting not just for his son, but for all those whose voices had been muffled. I did not seek this fight for revenge, but because it was the only way to protect my child. I hoped for justice and healing, not destruction. The defense pushed hard, but the evidence was overwhelming. Testimonies from other parents about lost trust and fear created a somber chorus that reverberated throughout the courtroom. Evan, the bully, was then called. The boy appeared small and uncertain, forced to confront the consequences of a toxic environment shaped by his father's actions. I spoke in his defense during the sentencing hearing. He is a child, tormented by his upbringing, but capable of change. He deserves guidance and counseling, not only punishment. The judge nodded and ordered court-appointed counseling and community service focused on reconciliation and healing. Morgan was formally dismissed, facing criminal investigations for her negligence and corruption. Dominic was indicted for multiple counts, including tax fraud and witness intimidation. The court ordered financial restitution and mandated reforms in the school district, a new anti-bullying task force, transparent administrative oversight, and mandatory reporting procedures to prevent future abuses. Outside, the media buzzed. Parents and students gathered, sharing hope as the system finally began to change. Kyle hugged me, his courage shining through the ordeal. In the weeks that followed, the school transformed. New leaders took charge, committed to healing and transparency. Parent committees formed to monitor progress. Kyle and other students participated in initiatives to foster inclusion and respect. The final victory was more than legal. It was a restoration of dignity, trust, and community. Walking home one evening, Kyle said, "Dad, you showed me what real strength looks like, standing up with your mind and heart, not just your fists." I smiled. Your mom believed that too. That's the legacy we carry. Our journey was hard, painful, but it was ours, a testament to quiet justice, healing after betrayal, and hope after heartbreak. After the storm of courtroom battles, revelations, and public scrutiny, our lives slowly began to settle into a new rhythm. The war for justice was over, but the journey toward healing had only just begun. I remember the first morning Kyle woke up without a shadow looming over him. He stretched, rubbed the sleep from his eyes, and for the first time in months, smiled genuinely over breakfast. The school was no longer a prison of fear, but a place cautiously reshaped by change. The district's reforms were underway. New anti-bullying policies, sensitive training for staff, transparent complaint channels. Parents, teachers, and students gathered regularly in forums, learning that their voices mattered in mending the broken system. Kyle joined the school's youth leadership group, a small but powerful step. He stood up in assemblies, sharing his story to inspire others to speak up. His confidence blossomed, and with it, a maturity beyond his 12 years. At home, our bond deepened. The long silence and fear gave way to open conversations. Kyle asked questions about my past, about Amelia, and about the man who had hidden his warrior spirit for so long. I shared stories about my military days, not the missions or medals, but the values Amelia and I believed in: courage, honor, empathy. I taught him life's most vital lesson. Strength isn't just physical. It's about knowing when to fight and when to heal. We spent weekends volunteering at community centers, organizing anti-bullying workshops for kids and parents. We brought experts, counselors, and survivors together, building a network of support where there had been silence. One afternoon, Kyle surprised me, asking to learn some basic self-defense, not to fight, but to protect and empower himself. We trained in the backyard, laughter and light returning where fear once ruled. Meanwhile, Dominic Chin's empire crumbled further. Legal proceedings continued as new evidence emerged, but the man who once ruled with threats now faded into obscurity. His son, Evan, began therapy and showed remarkable progress, a testament to the possibility of breaking destructive cycles. Morgan faced public disgrace. Her career ended as investigations revealed the extent of her betrayals. But through it all, I held no hatred. Amelia taught me that true strength is compassion, even for those who wrong us. Our community slowly rebuilt trust. Parents returned to school meetings, and teachers found renewed purpose. The wounds weren't invisible, but they weren't fatal. One evening, standing at Amelia's grave, I placed Kyle's hand in mine. "Your mom believed in peace and strength," I said softly. "We fought this battle for her, for you, and for every child who deserves safety and dignity." Kyle squeezed my hand and looked up. "Dad, thank you for never giving up." In that moment, I realized the promise I made years ago, to protect him, no matter the cost, was no longer just about survival. It was about legacy, about the story we were writing together, a story of quiet revenge turned healing justice. And as the sun set behind us, I knew we had fought hard to give Kyle, and every child after him, a future full of hope. The air was thick with the smell of early autumn dew as Kyle and I stepped into the quiet garden behind our home. The sky was painted with hues of gold and lavender, the perfect backdrop for a story's end. And yet, for us, it was another beginning. Months had passed since the courtroom battles, the heated hearings, and the storm of public scrutiny. The school had transformed itself, not because it wanted to, but because it had no choice. Policies redrawn, structures rebuilt, trust slowly mended by the voices our fight had finally empowered. Kyle no longer walked the hallways with his head bowed in fear, but with a quiet strength born from surviving a storm that could have broken him. He had grown up overnight, carrying the weight of what had been lost and the hope of what could now blossom. We sat in the garden, the grass cool beneath our feet, the peaceful sounds of evening reminding us of the peace we had fought tirelessly for. I looked at Kyle, whose eyes carried stories no child should bear, the bruises unseen, the silent sorrows, but now sparked with resilience. "Your mom would be proud," I whispered. Amelia, his mother, and my late wife, had been the compass for our lives, the reason I had fought without rage but with unwavering dignity. Kyle smiled softly. "I'm proud of us, Dad." We spoke of that journey, the darkness and the dawn. Though Dominic Chin's empire had collapsed under legal action and Morgan had been removed, our fight was never just condemnation. It was about rebuilding, a community where children could learn without fear, grow without scars, and dream without constraints. Kyle's role in this was pivotal. He found purpose beyond victimhood, stepping up in school forums and youth programs to champion anti-bullying efforts. Watching him speak was seeing hope incarnate. One afternoon, he surprised me by asking to train in self-defense, not for violence, but for confidence, for knowing his limits and boundaries. We practiced in the backyard, laughter weaving through the crunch of fallen leaves. The cycle that once threatened to consume us was breaking, through education, compassion, and strength. Yet, in this calm, a question lingered in my mind, one I wanted to share now. When betrayal cuts deepest, what limits would you cross to reclaim your family's honor? And how far would you be willing to forgive for the sake of healing? This story ends here, but the conversation doesn't have to. Where are you watching from? Share your city, your country, your town, so I can connect with each of you, because your presence matters more than you know. What stories grip your heart? What twists and dramas make you sit on the edge of your seat, breath held tight? What kinds of betrayals, revenge, or redemption moves you? Share your thoughts in the comments below. This channel exists because of you, where every narrative is crafted for the emotions you seek, the stories you deserve. If you enjoyed this tale, please hit like, subscribe, and join the journey ahead. There are more thrilling, epic, and emotionally charged stories coming your way. Stories of revenge, betrayal, heartbreak, and ultimate justice, all with the depth and cinematic flow you love. Thank you for trusting me to share this journey. Until next time, stay safe, stay strong, and keep your hearts open. See you in the next unforgettable saga.